Last week, we followed Mei Lin through the life she gave away. A village girl who sacrificed her dowry for love. She believed in his promise, believed he'd come back. But the only thing that returned was silence. And one day, standing under a plum tree, Mei Lin saw him again, with another woman. Her heart stopped. Her story ended. And then it began again. Reborn with memory, Mei Lin has chosen a different path. No longer waiting. No longer silent. In chapters 1 through 6, we watched her confront old wounds, speak new truths, and meet a man who never asked her to shrink. Today, we continue her journey, as a new kind of love begins to bloom, not with a promise, but with presence. We sat beneath the plum tree for hours that first week. Not every day, not by design, but by gravity, the way some people naturally fall into rhythm, even if they've never shared music before. Lian-jun didn't speak much, but when he did, it was never wasted. He asked me about the silk I wore, about how the fabric moved differently when it was lined in satin instead of cotton. And I asked about wood, the way his hands ran over grain like it had a pulse. Some evenings, we didn't speak at all. He would sit nearby, carving plum branches into curved shapes I didn't recognize. I would sit with tea, feeling the wind pass through my sleeves. It was the first time I had ever felt watched, without feeling measured. One late afternoon, I asked him, "Why don't you go to the city?" He glanced up. "The city doesn't make people better. It just makes them louder." I smiled, surprised. "And you prefer silence?" "I prefer things that stay." There was no lightning between us. No kiss stolen in the rain. No breathless declarations under a full moon. Only quiet and warmth and a strange steadiness in the way he looked at me, like I was something already whole. The day he gave me the carved plum pendant, I almost cried. It was rough, ungilded, the petals uneven. But it was the first time in years someone had made something for me, without asking for anything in return. He didn't say, "This is for you." He just handed it over, then went back to sharpening his blade. And I kept it, not in a box, but on a red string around my neck. I didn't love him yet, but I think the part of me that could still love was waking up, slowly, like the first white blossom before spring. The village fell quiet after sundown. Even the birds seemed to whisper. But I could hear his footsteps on the clay tiles. Slow, certain, without hesitation. "You shouldn't climb rooftops in a skirt," he said behind me, setting down a small clay jug. "You're right," I replied. "But I've been breaking rules since I gave away my dowry." He didn't laugh, but I saw it in his eyes. That flicker of "you're more than what they think." We sat side by side, legs dangling over the eaves. The plum tree below was glowing in moonlight, its pale blossoms catching silver like dew. Above us, the stars were clear, a sharp, endless quiet. I hadn't seen that many stars in the capital. Too many fires. Too much forgetting. He poured 2 cups of warmed rice wine and handed me one. "To the night," he said. "To silence," I offered back. We drank. After a while, he asked, "What did you want to be before all of this?" I blinked. No one had ever asked. Not really. Not even Shan Liang. I thought about it. Then softly. A weaver. Not of cloth. Of lives. I wanted to help women who never got to begin again. He looked at me. Really looked. Not with pity. With understanding. "You still could," he said. That stopped me. Not because it was dramatic, but because it felt like permission. Like someone was finally holding a door open, instead of walking through it first. The wind was gentle, but the way he looked at me wasn't. It was steady, solid, and almost asking. Not for a kiss, not for a touch, but for space. Space inside me I hadn't let anyone walk in again. "You don't have to be gentle with me," I said, voice lower. "I'm not," he replied. "I'm being careful." That's different. I don't remember leaning toward him, but I remember the warmth of his palm, as it rested just behind my shoulder. Not pulling, just there. an invitation. And I remember the moment. His forehead touched mine. The kind of closeness that says, I will wait, but I won't leave. I didn't kiss him. Not that night. But when I laid in bed later, alone, I found myself tracing my lips, as if something had just passed through them. Not wine, not breath, but the beginning of something soft and slow, and terrifyingly real. A week passed, maybe more, but time moves differently when it no longer hurts. One morning, I found Lien Jun kneeling beneath the plum tree, tying a red thread around a carved wooden pendant. Another blossom, smaller this time, smooth at the edges. He stood when he saw me. This is the third one you've carved, I said, teasing gently. This one's not for your neck, he replied. I blinked. He stepped forward and offered it, palms up. A tiny plum blossom. And beside it, on the same red string, 2 silver rings. Not ornate, not polished, just simple, forged, honest. He didn't say, will you marry me? He didn't need to. Instead, you already live in my house. You already drink my tea. The tree already thinks you're its keeper. I just thought it was time we stopped pretending this isn't forever. I smiled. I didn't cry. I placed my hand over his and closed his fingers around the rings. Then plant them, I whispered, before I change my mind. You won't, he said, with that quiet certainty I was learning to trust. We didn't tell the village right away. Not because it was a secret, but because it was ours. We married in spring, beneath the plum tree. No parade. No guests from the capital. No fireworks. Just his mother's comb in my hair. And my father's tea poured into a shared cup. And his hands over mine. He didn't promise me the stars. He didn't swear he'd never leave. He simply said, I'll build it around you, whatever life you choose. And I, for the first time in 2 lives, believed it. I was born beneath a plum tree. I died beneath it once. And now, in a city that doesn't know my name, I water it every morning. The city welcomed us with noise, spice, and endless motion. We weren't special here. Not like in the village. But that was exactly what I wanted. Here, no one whispered about the girl who gave her dowry away. No one pitied the one whose lover never came home. Here, I was just Mei Lin, new wife, fabric seller, and the woman who smiled with her eyes more than her lips. We opened a shop on Lantern Street, a corner lot near a market and a shrine. Lien Jun built the counter by hand. I selected the silks, not flashy, not garish, but graceful. Real. Women began to come. First curious, then loyal. I offered them more than fabric. I offered them a version of themselves they had forgotten. We lived above the shop in a quiet room with paper walls and a balcony just wide enough for 2 chairs and a plum tree in a painted ceramic pot. At night, Lien Jun would rub sawdust from his hands and ask what color sold best that day. He never asked how much money I made, just whether I felt tired and whether I'd eaten. A month after the first sale, I opened the drawer where I had hidden Shun Liang's letter. Still folded, still neat. I didn't read it again. Instead, I lit a candle, walked to the plum tree on the balcony, dug a small hollow into the soil, and laid the letter beneath it. You asked to be forgotten, I whispered. So bloom here, and be nothing more than roots. Then I covered it, watered it, and let it go. I never told Lien Jun what I had buried. But the next morning, he touched my hand and said, You seem lighter. And I smiled, because he wasn't wrong. A few weeks later, I felt different. Not sick, not tired, just fuller. As if something had begun to grow inside me. Not worry, not memory. Life. I told him on the balcony, under moonlight. I didn't make it dramatic. I simply placed his hand on my belly and said, It's not just us anymore. He looked down, then back at me, and whispered, I'll build more walls. Stronger ones. So nothing ever breaks what's growing in you. I didn't cry. Not until the next morning, when I caught myself humming while folding silk. The city was never mine. Not in the way the village had once been. But in this shop. In this home, in this man, I had carved out something better than a past. I had built a present that stayed. I used to think rebirth was something that happened to me. But now I know. It also happens through you. In the way a child's cry cracks something open. That was never meant to heal completely. She came in the second spring, just as the first blossoms opened on the plum tree. We'd planted in a balcony pot barely big enough to hold memory. The labor wasn't long, but it wasn't silent. I was not gentle. I cursed. I wept. I bit down on my sleeve. And when the pain finally broke open into life, I thought of my mother, how she must have looked at me the same way. Not with pride, not with fear, but with that quiet, trembling wonder that says, "You are real now." And nothing I have ever done matters more than this. Lien Jun held her first. His hands still smelled of cedar and plum bark. He didn't speak, but I saw his shoulders rise and fall, as if the weight of everything had finally found a reason. Then he gave her to me. She was so small, and so loud. Eyes tightly shut, fists balled like she was already ready to fight for her place in this world. Yuehua, I whispered. She didn't know her name yet, but I did. Moonlight. Because you were born to soften things we thought would never shine again. We didn't invite anyone. No celebration. No red silk visitors. Just us. And the plum blossoms falling like a blessing through the open balcony door. In the quiet weeks after, I kept her close. Even when she slept, I watched her, afraid she would vanish like everything else once had. But she didn't. She stayed. She breathed. She stretched and sneezed and smiled in her sleep. And every time I felt something in me unclench. One morning, while nursing her near the plum tree, I found a single blossom, with red streaks along its edges, like a scar, or a warning. And when I opened the shop later that day, a letter waited by the door, unmarked, folded neatly. Inside, a name I hadn't spoken in years. Lin Yao, Shun Liang's mother. I almost didn't open the letter, but the handwriting was familiar, too careful, too practiced, like someone afraid of spilling truth too quickly. Mei Lin, I do not write to stir the past. I write to close it. My son, what remains of him, no longer knows where he belongs. But I know this. The only place he was ever whole was when he stood beside you. I ask only for a conversation. One tea. One afternoon. No apologies. No demands. Just memory. Lin Yao. I held the letter in one hand, and Yuehua in the other. She cooed in her sleep. Her fingers curled around the hem of my sleeve. She will never know that kind of pain, I whispered. Not if I can help it. Lin Yao arrived 3 days later. Not with a servant. Not dressed like a woman from the capital. She wore simple linen, her hair streaked with gray, and her eyes, not accusing, just tired. I served her tea on the balcony, where the plum tree stood tall and defiant, rooted in the past, yet blooming in the present. We didn't speak for a while. Only the wind did, carrying the scent of petals and the faint murmur of the city's life below. Finally, she said, he wanted to write. After you saw him. After he saw the child. But he knew it would do more harm than good. I stayed silent. She continued. He lives alone now. Works in the village. Never speaks your name. But I think he still dreams it. I didn't know what she wanted me to say. So, I asked instead, do you hate me? She blinked, then shook her head. No. I envy you. You made him into a memory worth mourning. I poured her more tea. She reached into her sleeve and pulled out something wrapped in plum red cloth. A letter. Older. Creased. He wrote this a year ago, but never sent it. I was going to burn it, but it doesn't belong to me. She placed it gently beside the teacup. And stood. I won't return, but thank you for making him human, even if it cost you your heart. When she left, I stared at the letter. Then, like the last time, I didn't open it. I simply folded the cloth tighter and laid it beside the pot of plum blossoms. Lien Jun came out later. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. He saw the way my shoulders had settled, and knew this story was finally over. Do you want me to move the tree? He asked. We could replant it in the shop garden. I shook my head.
No.
Let it stay. This is where things bloom. And stay blooming. And for the first time since my first life ended, I slept without a single dream. Just soft breaths. The sound of our daughter laughing in her sleep. And the scent of plum petals brushing the open window. We don't always realize when the past is truly over. Not until the future walks in and calls us Mama. Yuehua took her first steps in the silk room. Between two racks of embroidered fabrics, her little feet wobbling on smooth stone.
She didn't fall.
She never did things halfway. Lien Jun called her a plum bud, small, stubborn, and always reaching toward light. He carved her a wooden toy that jingled with little silver beads. She ignored it. She was too busy pulling on my hanfu hem and asking what Empire Red meant. The boutique was no longer just a shop. It was a name people whispered at the tea houses. The plum jar. Known for its taste, its texture, and the woman who could glance once at your wrists and tell you exactly what color you'd forgotten you loved. I didn't do it for wealth. I did it for the women who came in afraid to speak, who left with shoulders straighter, who came back not to buy more silk,
but to say.
He said I looked like myself again. It was on a warm late spring morning that she entered. A noble woman, veiled in pearls and shadow. Two maids in silence behind her.
She didn't bow.
She didn't smile. She simply looked at me and said, I want you to dress the Empress's niece. For her engagement. Silence. Not even the wind dared move. I looked at her hands, unloved, jeweled. At her sleeves, imported silk with thread I hadn't seen in a decade. She was not from the city. She was from the court. You have the wrong person, I said carefully. No, she replied. I have exactly the right one. She pulled a folded commission paper from her sleeve. Red stamped. Sealed. The Empress saw your brocade on a minor merchant's wife. She wants that same artistry. Not from the factory. From your hands. Lien Jun arrived just as I was finishing the tea.
He looked at me.
At her. At the commission scroll. He didn't say anything. But I saw the flicker in his jaw. The way his hand tightened around the doorframe. When she left, she said only, You have 3 days to decide. But I suggest you say yes. Some women spend lifetimes begging for the door you've just been handed. That night, I sat by the plum tree again. Yuehua asleep inside. Lien Jun beside me, silent, sanding what he didn't need to fix. And I asked, What would you do? He didn't look at me when he answered. I'd build whatever you needed me to. But I won't hold up walls you don't want to walk behind. I didn't respond. But I rested my hand on his knee. Because this time, I wasn't choosing for love. I was choosing for me. And I had until morning to decide whether I would leave the safety I had built. To leave a mark on a world that once tried to erase me. I said yes. Not because I trusted them, but because I trusted myself. The next morning, I signed the scroll with my shop name. The Plum Jar. Mei Lin. A name once only whispered, now sealed in red ink beside a mark of the Empress herself. They sent a carriage. Of course they did. Not flashy, but expensive in its silence. The kind of wood that absorbs sound. The kind of silk curtains that don't let whispers escape. I left Yuehua with Lien Jun. She cried when I handed her off.
He didn't.
But he held my hand before I stepped inside. Whatever room you walk into, he said, don't forget, you've already built one they can't take from you. The palace wasn't what I expected. There were no golden dragons. No echoing jade halls. Just wide stone walkways. Gardens with perfect symmetry. And women who smiled without meaning it. I was led not to the Empress, but to the lady advisor, the woman who had visited the shop. She poured the tea herself. That was rare. And dangerous. You will have access to the palace's silk vault, she said. You will have your own apprentice. And guards. But if you speak out of turn. I won't, I replied. She smiled. Good. Because this commission is not about silk. It's about how quietly you can make a woman unforgettable. I left with a sketch scroll, 3 threads, and 2 guards. I had not seen the Empress, but I had already felt her hand, wrapped around my thread. Back home, Lian Jun waited by the door.
He didn't ask.
But that night, after Yuehua slept, we sat on the balcony under the plum tree, as always. I leaned my head on his shoulder and said, "It's not just fabric anymore. It's a mirror. And they want to use it to control their reflection."
He didn't speak.
But he placed his palm over mine, flat and firm. Then make sure they see themselves, and not the mask. The next morning, I unrolled the fabric, laid it flat on the counter,
And began to draw.
not for beauty, not for favor, but for legacy. The palace smelled of jasmine and quiet fear. Here, women didn't raise their voices. They raised their sleeves. On the 3rd day of early summer, I returned to the court through the north gate. The guards said nothing. The silk apprentice they'd assigned to me bowed twice and walked 6 steps behind me. My hands did not shake. My feet did not hesitate. But my heart whispered a warning with every step. Do not forget. You were not born to walk marble floors. You were born beneath a tree. They led me to the silk garden. Not a real garden, but a long hall flanked by scrolls and dyed tapestries, smelling of dried herbs and ink. There, the lady advisor waited. So did 5 other seamstresses. None of them smiled. One of them looked me up and down, as if measuring my worth in a single glance. "This is where your talent ends," her gaze said, "and where your politics begin." I spent the morning sketching. Nothing grand. Just an embroidery sleeve for the Empress's niece, a wedding robe, gold threaded with plum blossoms, moon lilies, and koi. Each choice had meaning. Each color, a statement. And I would not let them speak lies through my hands. Before noon, I was summoned to a small pavilion by a pond, round like a coin, filled with lotus leaves. He was waiting there, a nobleman in deep sea-green robes. His face unreadable,
His voice soft. "So you are the one," he said.
the widow who returned from silence. I didn't answer. Not at first. His words were too precise, too sharp. "I am Mei Lin," I said evenly. "And I am not a widow." He smiled.
"No."
"But once you are forgotten, that's worse, I think." "What do you want?" I asked. "To remind you that the court does not forget. Not when it is threatened. Not when it is moved." He set down a folded paper. "Someone has begun asking questions about you. Then they can ask." "They already have." He left without another word. And when I opened the paper, there was only one sentence written inside. "What grows again can be cut again." That night, I sat beside the plum tree on the balcony and watched Yuehua sleep through the paper door. I didn't wake Lian Jun. Not yet. But I traced my fingers over the hem of the Empress's silk commission and thought, if they want to know who I am now, then I'll show them. Not all knives shine. Some come threaded in gold and stitched beneath compliments. They ruined the sleeve. The final sleeve of the wedding robe, hand-dyed, embroidered with layered plum blossoms. It had taken me a week to finish. That morning, I found it slashed. Not with rage, but with precision. The cut ran clean beneath the sleeve's hem, where no one would notice until the bride raised her arm. And then,
Shame.
no one claimed it. No one apologized. But when I looked up, for pairs of eyes avoided mine. And one, a girl with pearl pins and powder-dusted gloves, smiled just a little too slowly. I reported it. Of course I did. The lady advisor listened, her hands folded in her sleeves. "Accidents happen," she said. "This was not an accident." "Then prove it." That evening, I returned to the boutique. Yuehua was asleep. Lian Jun was carving a toy box by the window. But when he looked at me, I saw it in his eyes. "Something changed," he said. I nodded, then told him everything. He didn't tell me to quit. He didn't ask me to come home. He simply said, "We knew this wouldn't be clean. But you don't wear white silk, Mei Lin. You wear color." The next day, I returned with the damaged sleeve, and I stitched over the cut, not to hide it, but to highlight it. I sewed a blossom over the tear, a bloom larger than the others. A scar turned into art, and when the noble women saw it at the fitting, they paused. "What is this?" one asked. "Imperfection," I replied. "Embraced. Honored. Because beauty without truth is just a lie we wear." They didn't applaud, but they didn't smile that way again either. And when the Empress's niece wore the robe,
She cried.
not for the wedding, but because she said, "It looks like someone finally saw me." That night, a letter was slipped beneath my door. Handwritten.
Short.
"Some of us were waiting for a woman like you. Thank you for not lowering your eyes. Some ghosts don't come to haunt. They come to confess." The letter arrived tied in twine, with no seal, no return address. But I recognized the handwriting the moment I saw it. Shun Liang.
I stared at it for a long time.
Then opened it. Not because I needed answers, but because I was no longer afraid of the questions. "Mei Lin, you don't owe me this moment. And I don't deserve it. But I am writing anyway. Not to be remembered, but to let you forget me without burden. I failed you, not just in leaving, but in believing the world's promises over yours. I thought passing the exam made me a man, but it only made me useful. And then disposable. I was married within the year, not by love, but by duty. You were the only person who ever gave without asking. And I left. Asterisk, I have no face left. But I give you this truth. You were not forgotten. Asterisk. I remember you each spring, when plum blossoms fall. Forgive me, or don't. But please, live without carrying me anymore. Shun Liang." I folded the letter slowly. Then I lit the corner with the same match I used to boil tea for Yuehua. Watched it curl. Watched it vanish. I didn't cry. I didn't speak his name. I didn't even keep the ashes. I simply walked out to the balcony, kissed my daughter's forehead, and said to Lianjun. He remembered. He nodded once, then poured more tea. "And you?" "I've remembered enough." The next morning, I took down the plum blossom pendant he once carved me. I wrapped it in red cloth, tied it with twine, and buried it beneath the plum tree. Not because it hurt, but because I had made room for something better to grow. I have died once. I have waited. I have stitched my life back together, thread by trembling thread.
But now I live.
And everything blooms. The Empress wore my robe at the spring rite. The palace attendants whispered. The court watched. And though my name was not spoken aloud, it passed from tongue to tongue like jasmine wind. The plum jar woman. The one who sews scars into blossoms. She's not from the capital, you know. No, I was not. I was from a village where hearts were broken beneath trees. But I do not break anymore. Yuehua is 4 now. She runs the silk bolts through her fingers and names the colors better than I ever could. Moon white, tea gold, rain blue. Her hands are small, but she holds thread like memory. I teach her not just how to sew, but how to stay soft without surrender. When you wear a robe, I tell her, make sure it wears you, too. Lianjun added another room to the shop. He says nothing of the court anymore. But at night, he still asks if my shoulders ache. He still pours my tea first. He still looks at me like I am not a woman who was saved, but a woman who walked out of fire. And kept walking. One evening, Yuehua asked me, "Why do you always touch that tree before bed?" I smiled. Because it's where I left the part of me that waited. Waited for what? I kissed her forehead. For this. The boutique is no longer mine alone. Women come not just to buy, but to learn. Widows. Girls.
Wives.
Silent daughters. I teach them how to mend, how to create, how to name their own colors. And beneath the plum tree, every spring, I sit with a cup of warm wine. Not waiting. Not grieving.
Just being.
And when the petals fall into my lap, I don't flinch. I let them stay. The past didn't disappear. It simply stopped asking to be remembered. And I stopped answering. Subscribe to Ashes to Roses for new videos every week. Don't miss a single petal.